The Grand Harris estate loomed on the edge of a sprawling countryside, a testament to the success and ambition of its owner, John Harris. A man of humble beginnings, John had built his empire from nothing, brick by brick, through sheer determination and a vision that few could match. Now, in his twilight years, he found himself surrounded by luxury, yet haunted by an emptiness that money could never fill. John had always believed in the power of family. After losing his first wife to a long illness years ago, he had fallen into a deep despair. It was during one of his darkest periods that he met Laura, a beautiful, charismatic woman nearly 30 years his junior. Laura had swept into his life like a whirlwind, her charm a balm to his broken spirit. For a while, she brought joy back into his home, filling the quiet halls with laughter and energy. John believed he had found love again, a partner to share his golden years. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in the perfect facade. A suspicious change. At first, the changes were subtle. Laura, once attentive and caring, became distant. Her evenings, which were once spent beside John, turned into late nights out with friends. Her warm smiles became forced, and her laughter, which had once lit up the room, felt hollow. John tried to dismiss these feelings as paranoia, chalking it up to his declining health and the natural drift that sometimes occurs in marriages. But deep down, he couldn't shake the unease growing within him. Adding to his suspicions was Laura's sudden obsession with luxury. While John had always been generous, she began to push the limits of his patience. Lavish shopping sprees, extravagant vacations, and unnecessary renovations to their already opulent home became the norm. When John voiced concern, she would brush him off with a dismissive wave of her hand, saying, "You can't take it with you, darling." Her behavior gnawed at him, but John chose to ignore the warning signs. He convinced himself that Laura was simply trying to enjoy life to the fullest, a mindset he wished he could adopt more freely as his health continued to decline. A trusted presence. Amid the growing distance between John and Laura, there was one constant in his life: Grace Walker, his caretaker. Grace had been hired 2 years earlier after John's health began to falter. A widow with 2 young children, Grace carried an air of quiet strength and compassion. Her kindness was evident in everything she did, from the way she adjusted John's pillows to the gentle manner in which she encouraged him to eat when he had no appetite. Grace wasn't just an employee. She had become a confidant. She listened to John's stories about his early days of struggle, the dreams he had for his company, and the deep love he had once shared with his first wife. Unlike Laura, Grace never seemed interested in John's wealth. Her focus was always on his well-being, and her sincerity shone through in every interaction. It was Grace who noticed the sadness in John's eyes one afternoon as she brought him his tea. Setting the tray down, she asked softly, "Mr. Harris, is everything all right?" John hesitated. He wasn't the type to share his burdens easily, especially with someone who worked for him. But something about Grace's presence was disarming. Finally, he sighed and said, "Grace, have you ever felt like you were surrounded by people, yet completely alone?" Grace nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Loneliness isn't about how many people are around you, Mr. Harris. It's about whether the people near you truly care." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in months, John felt seen. The eavesdropped conversation. It was a rainy evening when John's suspicions about Laura crystallized into undeniable truth. As thunder rumbled in the distance, he sat in his study, leafing through old photo albums. The sound of Laura's voice drifted through the slightly ajar door. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and mocking. "I've waited long enough," she said. "The old man isn't going to last forever, and when he's gone, I'll finally get what I deserve." Grace? Oh, she's just a nobody. Once I have the money, she's out of here. John froze. The album slipped from his hands, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he had trusted with his heart, the woman he had hoped to spend his final days with, saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. Worse, she intended to cast out the one person who had truly cared for him during his illness. A decision is made. That night, John lay awake, his mind racing. He felt betrayed, foolish, and heartbroken. But as dawn broke, he made a decision. He wouldn't allow Laura's greed to dictate his legacy. He realized that it wasn't too late to set things right. The next morning, he called his lawyer, Richard, an old friend who had stood by him through countless ups and downs. As they sat together in the study, John recounted everything he had overheard. Richard listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. "John," Richard said finally, "we need to act quickly. If Laura senses what you're planning, she might try to contest the will or manipulate you further." John nodded. "I want everything to go to Grace. She's the only one who's earned it. But more than that, I want to ensure that Laura can't exploit my legacy. I won't let her tarnish what I've built." Richard agreed to draw up a new will immediately. As they discussed the details, John felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control over his life. The calm before the storm. In the days that followed, John kept up appearances, pretending to be unaware of Laura's true intentions. He watched her closely, noting the way her eyes gleamed whenever money was mentioned. He noticed how she avoided spending time with him, preferring instead to host parties or browse high-end boutiques online. Meanwhile, John began to confide more in Grace. Though he didn't reveal the full extent of his plans, he hinted at changes to come. "You've been a blessing, Grace," he told her one evening. "When the time comes, I hope you'll continue to share that kindness with others." Grace, ever humble, brushed off the compliment. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Harris. You've already given me so much by trusting me with your care." But John knew better. Grace's loyalty and integrity were rare qualities, ones that deserved to be rewarded. The stage is set. The day the new will was finalized, John felt a mix of emotions. Relief, knowing he had taken steps to protect his legacy. Sadness, as he reflected on the betrayal that had led to this moment. And a quiet sense of hope, knowing that Grace's selflessness would be honored in a way that would change her life forever. As he signed the document, John looked at Richard and said, "This isn't just about the money. It's about ensuring that the people who truly matter are the ones who carry on my name." Richard placed a reassuring hand on John's shoulder. "You've done the right thing, John. And when the time comes, the world will see the kind of man you truly were." Closing scene. That night, as the rain pattered against the windows, John sat alone in his study. He stared at the fire crackling in the hearth, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold betrayal he had endured. Despite everything, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. In the distance, Laura's laughter echoed down the hall, oblivious to the changes that had been set in motion. And though John's heart ached, he allowed himself a small smile. He knew that soon the truth would come to light, and the gold digger's game would be over. The Harris estate was unusually quiet in the days following John's secret meeting with his lawyer. Though he remained calm on the surface, his mind raced with thoughts of the inevitable confrontation. He knew the truth about Laura could no longer remain hidden, but timing was everything. To ensure his plan unfolded without a hitch, John decided to maintain his usual demeanor, masking his growing determination beneath a veil of frailty. Laura, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, continued her extravagant routine. She flitted from one boutique to another, hosting wine nights with friends who eagerly fed her ego. To her, the estate was already hers. It was only a matter of time before John's declining health would finalize her ascension. But while Laura indulged in her delusions of grandeur, John was carefully orchestrating the final act of their charade. Grace, too, remained unaware of the pivotal role she would soon play. Her focus stayed on her duties, ensuring John's comfort and attending to his needs with quiet diligence. The telltale document. One crisp autumn afternoon, a seemingly insignificant envelope arrived at the estate. Laura, with her usual air of entitlement, plucked it from the mail pile without a second thought. She tossed aside the rest of the letters, her interest piqued only by the weight of this particular envelope. Unfolding the contents, her eyes widened as she scanned the first few lines. The letter, sent from a prestigious law firm, referenced changes to John's will. Although vague, it mentioned new provisions that would better reflect the values and relationships central to Mr. Harris's life. Panic clawed at her chest. Laura was no fool. She knew her actions hadn't gone unnoticed. John's subtle shifts in demeanor, the quiet conversations with his lawyer, and now this letter. They painted a picture she could no longer ignore. Desperate to regain control, Laura stormed into John's study, brandishing the letter like a weapon. "What is this, John?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the stillness. John, seated in his favorite leather chair, looked up slowly. His eyes, once tired and resigned, now held a steely resolve that Laura hadn't seen before. "It's exactly what it says," he replied, his tone even. "I've made some adjustments to my estate. After all, it's my legacy. And I decide what happens to it." Laura's facade cracked. "You've made adjustments without consulting me. I'm your wife, John. Don't I have a say in this?" John leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "A wife," he said softly, "should be a partner, someone who stands by you in sickness and in health. But tell me, Laura, have you truly been that for me?" The weight of his words hung in the air. For the first time, Laura was at a loss. She stammered, "Of course I have. How could you question that?" But John simply shook his head. "Actions speak louder than words, Laura." Grace's surprise visitor. Unbeknownst to Laura, John had already begun setting his plans in motion. That same afternoon, Grace received a visitor at her modest home. It was Richard, John's trusted lawyer, carrying an envelope of his own. Grace, surprised but polite, invited him inside, offering a cup of tea as they sat at her small kitchen table. Richard wasted no time. "Grace, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Harris," he began. "He's made some significant decisions regarding his estate, and you're at the center of them." Grace blinked, confused. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with me?" Richard handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter from John, written in his distinctive, meticulous handwriting. As Grace read the words, her hands began to tremble. "Grace," the letter began, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. In my darkest moments, you've been my light. While others saw my wealth, you saw the man behind it. For that, and for so much more, I want you to know that you'll always have a place in my heart and in my legacy." The letter went on to explain the changes John had made to his will. Grace was named the primary beneficiary, not out of pity, but as a testament to her integrity and the kindness she had shown without expecting anything in return. John's fortune, which Laura had long assumed was hers, would instead go to Grace, along with the estate itself. Grace was overwhelmed. This can't be real," she whispered. "I'm just his caretaker. I don't deserve this." Richard placed a reassuring hand on hers. "John thinks otherwise. And from what I've seen, Grace, he's right." Laura's descent. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Laura's desperation was beginning to show. She tried every tactic she could think of to regain John's trust. She cooked meals she'd never bothered to make before, feigned interest in his stories, and even began accompanying him on his walks around the grounds. But John saw through her act. Each forced smile and hollow gesture only solidified his resolve. As the days passed, Laura's patience wore thin. Her frustration boiled over during a dinner she had arranged to reconnect with John. Over candlelight and a table laden with expensive dishes, she tried one last time to manipulate him. "You know, John," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I've been thinking about our future. I want us to be happy together, to enjoy the time we have left." John raised an eyebrow. "Our future, Laura? Or my money?" Her carefully constructed mask slipped. "Why would you say that?" she snapped. "You're letting your paranoia get the best of you." John leaned back, his expression calm but unyielding. "No, Laura. I'm finally seeing things clearly." Laura slammed her fork down, the clatter echoing through the room. "You can't do this to me, John. I've been by your side all these years. I've earned my place in your life." John met her gaze, his voice steady. "What you've earned, Laura, is exactly what you'll get. Nothing more, nothing less. A confession in the dark." Later that night, Laura retreated to her room, her mind racing. She couldn't let John's new will stand. If he passed away with those changes in place, her dreams of wealth and power would crumble. Driven by greed and fear, she devised a plan. Under the cover of darkness, she crept into John's study, searching for the documents that would seal her fate. Her hands shook as she rifled through drawers and cabinets, hoping to find a way to reverse what had been done. But her search was interrupted by a voice behind her, looking for something. She spun around to find John standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. His eyes bore into hers, unflinching. "I was just checking on you," she lied, her voice faltering. John stepped into the room, his presence commanding despite his frailty. "You're not here for me, Laura. You're here for yourself, and that's all you've ever been here for." Laura's anger erupted. "You think you're so noble, don't you? Giving away your fortune to that caretaker of yours. She's nothing, John. Nothing. She doesn't deserve a penny of what you've worked for." John's face hardened. "And you do. Tell me, Laura, what exactly have you done to earn it? Was it the nights you spent out while I lay here alone? The money you squandered on meaningless luxuries? Or perhaps it was the moment you decided I was nothing more than a stepping stone to your ambitions?" Laura's silence spoke volumes, the calm before the storm. The confrontation marked the beginning of the end for Laura's schemes. John, with Richard's guidance, ensured that every legal safeguard was in place to protect his new will. Grace, still grappling with the weight of John's decision, continued her duties, unaware of the growing tension between John and Laura. But the storm was far from over. Laura, unwilling to accept defeat, began plotting her next move, and while John remained vigilant, he knew the battle wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming his dignity and leaving behind a legacy of integrity. As the days turned into weeks, the stage was set for the final showdown. The truth, long buried beneath lies and deceit, was ready to come to light, and when it did, no one would emerge unchanged. The tension in the Harris estate had become almost unbearable. The once grand home, which had been a sanctuary of elegance and grace, now felt like the stage of an unraveling tragedy. Laura's behavior grew increasingly erratic. John's quiet determination only fueled her paranoia, while Grace, still unaware of the full extent of John's plans, continued her duties with a sense of unease. She couldn't ignore the icy glares Laura began directing her way, nor the whispers that ceased abruptly when she entered the room. John, however, remained calm. The pieces of his plan were in place, and he knew that the truth was a powerful weapon, one Laura could not escape. As the days passed, he waited for the right moment to bring everything to light. Laura's desperate gambit. One evening, as John rested in his study, Laura made her move. Dressed in an expensive gown and wearing the pearl necklace John had gifted her early in their marriage, she sauntered into the room. Her demeanor was sugary sweet, but her eyes betrayed her desperation. "John," she began, her voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot about us. I know things haven't been perfect lately, but I want to make things right." John looked up from his book, his expression neutral. "Is that so?" "Yes," Laura said, forcing a smile. "I was thinking we could take a trip, just the two of us, somewhere quiet, where we can reconnect. Maybe the coast. You've always loved the sea." John closed his book and set it aside. "Laura, you've never shown an interest in the coast before." Laura's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "Well, things change. I just want us to be happy again." John's gaze hardened. "What you want, Laura, is control, and you're running out of it." Her mask slipped. "Why are you doing this, John? Why are you trying to shut me out? I'm your wife, for heaven's sake." John rose from his chair, leaning heavily on his cane. "You stopped being my wife the moment you saw me as a bank account instead of a partner. Everything you've done, the lies, the deceit, it's all been about what you could take from me. But you've taken enough, Laura. It ends now." Grace learns the truth. While Laura's confrontation with John left her reeling, Grace was dealing with a revelation of her own. She hadn't spoken much about the letter Richard had delivered, hoping it was some kind of mistake. The idea that John would leave her his fortune was inconceivable. She had spent her life working hard, raising her children, and living modestly. The thought of such wealth felt overwhelming, and in some ways, undeserved. One afternoon, as she tidied John's room, she decided to broach the subject. "Mr. Harris," she began hesitantly, "I need to ask you something. It's about the letter Mr. Richard gave me." John, seated by the window, turned to her with a kind smile. "What about it, Grace? It can't be real," she said, shaking her head. "You've been so generous already. I'm just your caretaker. I'm not family." John's expression grew serious. "Grace, family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, compassion, and standing by someone when they need it most. In every way that matters, you've been more of a family to me than Laura ever has." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't deserve." John held up a hand. "Don't say that. You've earned every bit of what I'm leaving you. You've cared for me when no one else did. You've treated me like a person, not a means to an end. That's why I chose you." Overwhelmed, Grace could only nod, her heart heavy with gratitude and disbelief. The day of reckoning. John decided that the time had come to reveal his plans. He summoned both Laura and Grace to the study, instructing Richard to join them. Laura arrived first, her nerves thinly veiled by a forced calm. Grace entered quietly, her posture tense as she took a seat in the corner of the room. Richard stood by the door, his presence a silent reassurance to John. Once everyone was assembled, John began. "I've called you all here because there are things that need to be said, truths that can no longer be ignored." Laura smirked, folding her arms. "Oh, this should be good." John ignored her. "For too long, I'd allowed myself to be blind to what's been happening around me. But no more. Laura, I know about your plans. I know how you've squandered my money, how you've belittled Grace, and how you've seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to your ambitions." Laura's face flushed. "That's absurd. You have no proof of any of this." John gestured to Richard, who stepped forward with a folder. "Actually, I do," John said. "Richard has documented every withdrawal, every unnecessary expense, every betrayal. It's all here." Richard opened the folder and began reading aloud. He detailed the extravagant purchases, the suspicious bank transfers, and the conversations Laura had carelessly conducted within earshot of the staff. As the evidence mounted, Laura's bravado crumbled. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I'm your wife." John's voice was firm. "You were my wife in name only. And now you're nothing more than a memory of a mistake I made." The new will. With Laura silenced, John turned to Grace. "Grace, I want to formally thank you for everything you've done for me. You've given me peace in my final days, and for that, I can never repay you." He nodded to Richard, who produced the new will. "This document ensures that my estate will go to the person who has truly earned it. Grace, you're that person." Grace's hands flew to her mouth. "Mr. Harris, I can't. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," John replied. "Just promise me you'll use it to make a difference, to continue being the kind and selfless person you've always been." Laura, now seething, sprang to her feet. "You think you can just erase me? I won't let you get away with this." Richard calmly interjected. "The will is airtight, Mrs. Harris. You'll find there's nothing you can do." Laura's downfall. Defeated and humiliated, Laura stormed out of the study. The staff watched as she packed her belongings, her once haughty demeanor replaced by a simmering rage. By the end of the day, she was gone, leaving behind a legacy of greed and betrayal. A new beginning. With Laura out of their lives, the atmosphere in the estate shifted. For the first time in years, the halls felt warm again. Grace, still overwhelmed by the magnitude of John's gift, decided to honor his legacy by establishing a foundation in his name. The Harris Foundation would provide support to caregivers, families in need, and those who, like John, had once felt forgotten. John, though growing weaker by the day, found peace in knowing his legacy would live on in a way that truly mattered. Grace and her children became his closest companions, filling his remaining days with laughter and love. Reflection. As John's health declined, he often reflected on his journey. He had made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, and allowed himself to be blinded by grief and loneliness. But in the end, he had found redemption. Through Grace, he had discovered the true meaning of family and the enduring power of kindness. Conclusion. The final chapter of John Harris' life was not defined by wealth or power, but by the connections he forged and the lives he touched. His story became a testament to the idea that it's never too late to make things right, to choose integrity over greed, and to leave behind a legacy of love. As the dust settled in the wake of Laura's departure, the Harris estate underwent a quiet transformation. The once cold mansion, defined by opulence and a sense of isolation, now echoed with warmth and purpose. John Harris, despite his waning health, seemed lighter, as though a burden he had carried for years had finally been lifted. For Grace Walker, however, the weight of John's generosity still sat heavily on her shoulders. The news of the will's changes had spread quickly, much faster than Grace would have liked. Gossip among the staff had trickled out into the community, and soon whispers about the caretaker who inherited a fortune were on everyone's lips. Some people celebrated Grace's good fortune, while others, fueled by envy and cynicism, questioned her motives. Grace, who had never sought attention, found herself thrust into the spotlight in a way she wasn't prepared for. A visit from the past. One afternoon, as Grace prepared John's lunch, there was a knock at the kitchen door. When she opened it, she found a woman standing there, a woman she hadn't seen in years. It was Deborah, an old neighbor from Grace's former apartment building. "Grace Walker," Deborah said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I heard the rumors, but I had to see it with my own eyes. Is it true? Did you really inherit all that money?" Grace hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Mr. Harris has been very generous," she said carefully. Deborah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the gleaming kitchen. "Generous? That's putting it mildly. People are saying you're a millionaire now. Imagine that. Little Grace, who used to borrow sugar from me, living in a mansion." Grace flushed, her discomfort evident. "It's not what people think. Mr. Harris made this decision because he believed in helping others. It's not just for me. It's for something bigger." Deborah scoffed. "Bigger? Grace, you're sitting on a fortune. If it were me, I'd be on a beach somewhere, sipping cocktails and forgetting all about this place." Grace shook her head. "That's not what this is about, Deborah. This money, it's a responsibility. Mr. Harris trusted me to use it wisely." Deborah's expression softened, and for a moment, the sharp edge in her voice disappeared. "You've always been too good for this world, Grace. I hope you know what you're getting into." John's legacy takes shape. As the days turned into weeks, Grace began to turn her attention to the promise she had made to John. The idea of creating a foundation in his name had started to take form in her mind, but she didn't know where to begin. One evening, as she sat in the study poring over notes, John wheeled himself into the room. "You've been working too hard," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Grace looked up, startled. "Mr. Harris, you should be resting." He waved her concern away. "I've spent enough time resting. Tell me, what's keeping you up at night?" Grace hesitated before answering. "I want to honor your legacy, Mr. Harris. I've been thinking about the foundation, but I don't know where to start. This is all so overwhelming." John's expression softened. Grace, you've already started. The fact that you're thinking about others, that you're putting their needs before your own, that's the foundation. The rest is just logistics. Grace smiled, his words easing some of her uncertainty. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I just want to make you proud. You already have, he said quietly. The public reaction. News of the Harris Foundation soon reached the local media. Reporters began to call, eager for an interview with the mysterious caretaker-turned-millionaire. Grace, however, was reluctant to step into the spotlight. She had always valued her privacy, and the idea of being the subject of public scrutiny made her uneasy. But as John reminded her, the foundation wasn't just about her. It was about the people it would help. Reluctantly, Grace agreed to a single interview, hoping it would satisfy the curiosity of the press and allow her to focus on the work ahead. The interview took place in the Harris Estate's sunroom, a bright and inviting space that mirrored Grace's demeanor. The reporter, a sharp but respectful woman named Sandra, asked thoughtful questions about Grace's journey, her relationship with John, and her plans for the future. You've gone from being a caregiver to inheriting a fortune, Sandra said. That's quite the transformation. How do you plan to use this newfound wealth? Grace took a deep breath before answering. It's not my wealth, she said. It's Mr. Harris's legacy. He wanted to make a difference in the world, and he trusted me to carry out that vision. The foundation will focus on supporting caregivers, helping families in need, and providing opportunities for those who feel forgotten. This isn't about me. It's about continuing his story. Sandra smiled, clearly impressed. It sounds like you have a clear sense of purpose. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the responsibility? Grace nodded. Every day. But then I remember why I'm doing this. Mr. Harris believed in me, and I won't let him down. The unexpected ally. The interview, broadcast across local channels, sparked a wave of support for the Harris Foundation. Donations began to pour in, accompanied by letters from people who had been touched by John's story. But not everyone was pleased. Among the voices of encouragement were whispers of skepticism and resentment, particularly from those who believed Grace had somehow manipulated her way into John's good graces. One day, as Grace sorted through the foundation's growing pile of correspondence, she received a letter that stood out. It was from a man named Walter Anderson, a former business partner of John's who had fallen out of favor years ago. The letter was short but sincere, offering both financial support and advice. Curious, Grace decided to meet with Walter, despite warnings from some of the staff. To her surprise, Walter turned out to be an elderly gentleman with a warm smile and a keen mind. Over coffee, he shared stories about John's early days in business, painting a picture of a man who had always valued integrity above all else. John was one of a kind, Walter said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. He made mistakes, sure, but he always tried to do the right thing in the end. That's why I'm here, Grace. I want to help you keep his legacy alive. Grace, moved by Walter's sincerity, accepted his offer. With his guidance, the foundation's operations became more streamlined, and its impact began to grow. Laura's return. Just as the foundation was gaining momentum, a shadow from the past reappeared. Laura, who had vanished after being disinherited, returned to the estate unannounced. She claimed she had come to apologize, but her presence immediately raised alarms. I had time to reflect, Laura said, her voice dripping with false humility. I see now how selfish I was, how much I took for granted. I just want to make amends. Grace, wary but polite, listened as Laura spun her tale of redemption. But John, who was resting upstairs, had no interest in her theatrics. When Grace informed him of Laura's arrival, he shook his head. She's not here to apologize, he said. She's here because she's realized there's nothing left for her out there. Despite John's warnings, Grace decided to give Laura a chance. She believed in second chances, and part of her hoped that Laura's remorse was genuine. But as time went on, it became clear that Laura's intentions were far from pure. The final goodbye. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John asked to speak with Laura one last time. She entered his room, her expression a mix of defiance and desperation. "I loved you once," John said, his voice steady despite his frailty. "I wanted to believe you loved me too. But love doesn't look like what you gave me. It doesn't take, it gives. And you took everything you could." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but John wasn't moved. "This is the last time we'll speak, Laura. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here. My legacy is in good hands now." With that, Laura left the estate for good, her presence a fading echo of a painful chapter in John's life. A legacy fulfilled. As John's health continued to decline, Grace stayed by his side, ensuring he was surrounded by the care and compassion he had shown to others. When he passed away, it was a quiet moment, marked by peace and gratitude. The Harris Foundation, now a thriving organization, became a beacon of hope for countless families. And Grace, forever humbled by John's faith in her, carried his legacy forward with unwavering dedication. In the end, John's story wasn't about the wealth he accumulated, but about the lives he touched. Through Grace and the Foundation, his kindness and vision lived on, proving that even in our final moments, we can create something lasting and beautiful. The weeks following John Harris' passing were both a time of mourning and renewal. The estate that had once symbolized isolation and mistrust now thrummed with purpose. Grace Walker, still grappling with the gravity of her new role, found herself at the center of a movement larger than she had ever imagined. The Harris Foundation, established in John's honor, was gaining momentum, its mission resonating with people from all walks of life. A community awakens. Word of the Harris Foundation's work began to spread far beyond the small town where John had built his empire. Media outlets covered its efforts, praising its focus on supporting caregivers, providing scholarships for underprivileged youth, and offering resources for struggling families. Donations poured in from across the country, each accompanied by heartfelt letters from people inspired by John's story. One letter stood out among the rest. It came from a man named Thomas, a retired nurse who had spent decades caring for patients in an underfunded hospital. He wrote, "When I heard about the Harris Foundation, it gave me hope. For years, I watched caregivers like myself pour our hearts into our work, often at great personal cost. To see someone recognize and honor that sacrifice is nothing short of extraordinary. Thank you for reminding us that what we do matters." Grace read the letter aloud during a staff meeting, her voice thick with emotion. "This is why we're here," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "To remind people that they're not invisible, that their work, their struggles, their sacrifices, they matter." The team, now bolstered by volunteers and new hires, responded with resounding applause. A visit to the past. Despite the growing success of the foundation, Grace felt a lingering need to revisit the places that had shaped her own journey. She returned to the modest apartment where she had lived with her children before working for John. The walls were chipped, the floors scuffed, but the memories were vivid. She remembered the nights she had gone without so her children could eat, the mornings spent praying for strength to face another day. It was here, in this tiny space, that she had first learned the value of resilience. And it was here that she had vowed to create a better life for her family. Standing in the dimly lit kitchen, Grace felt a wave of gratitude, not just for John's generosity, but for the struggles that had prepared her to receive it. As she left the apartment, she noticed a woman sitting on the stoop, cradling a baby in her arms. The woman's clothes were worn, her expression weary. Without hesitation, Grace approached her. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The woman looked up, startled. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Grace knelt beside her. "I used to live here," she said. "I know how hard it can be." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "It's just, everything feels so heavy. I don't know how I'm going to make it." Grace reached into her bag and handed the woman a card with the Harris Foundation's contact information. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said. "We're here to help. Challenges and triumphs. As the foundation grew, so did the challenges it faced. Some critics accused Grace of exploiting John's legacy for personal gain, while others questioned the foundation's ability to manage such a significant influx of resources. Grace, ever steadfast, chose to focus on the work rather than the noise. One of the foundation's first major initiatives was the construction of a caregiver resource center, aptly named the Harris Haven. Located in the heart of the city, the center offered counseling, training, and financial assistance to those in caregiving roles. At its grand opening, Grace stood before a crowd of supporters, her heart pounding. "When John Harris trusted me with his legacy, he wasn't just giving me a gift. He was giving all of us a challenge," she said. "A challenge to see the humanity in one another, to lift each other up, and to build a world where kindness and compassion are not exceptions, but the rule." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Grace's attention was drawn to a familiar face in the crowd. Walter Anderson, John's old business partner, stood near the back, nodding in approval. After the ceremony, he approached her. "You're doing good work, Grace," he said, his voice warm. "John would be proud." Grace smiled. "I hope so. He taught me that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways we can't imagine." An unlikely ally. As the foundation's work expanded, Grace received an unexpected visitor, Deborah, her former neighbor who had once scoffed at the idea of responsibility. To Grace's surprise, Deborah seemed different, more subdued, almost humbled. "I saw what you've been doing," Deborah said, shifting nervously in her seat. "I guess I didn't understand it at first, but seeing the lives you've touched, it made me realize how much I've taken for granted." Grace listened, her heart softening. "We all have moments where we lose sight of what's important," she said. "The real question is what we do when we find our way back." Deborah nodded. "I want to help. I don't have much, but I'd like to volunteer if you'll have me." Grace smiled. "We'd be honored to have you." Laura's redemption. Months later, a letter arrived at the foundation's office, addressed to Grace. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name on the return address was not. Laura Harris. Grace hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. Inside, she found a surprisingly heartfelt message. "Grace, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to write it. Losing John was hard, but losing his trust was harder. I've spent the past months reflecting on everything, on my mistakes, my selfishness, and the pain I caused. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try to make amends. If there's any way I can contribute to the work you're doing, please let me know." Grace stared at the letter, her emotions swirling. She didn't fully trust Laura's intentions, but she believed in the power of redemption. After discussing it with her team, she decided to give Laura a chance, under careful supervision. To everyone's surprise, Laura threw herself into the work with genuine enthusiasm. Whether motivated by guilt, grief, or a newfound sense of purpose, she began to prove herself as an asset to the foundation. Over time, her guarded interactions with Grace gave way to something resembling mutual respect. The ripple effect. As the Harris Foundation entered its second year, its impact was undeniable. Caregivers across the country shared stories of how the foundation had changed their lives, from providing financial relief to creating spaces where they felt seen and valued. Families who had been on the brink of despair found hope through its programs, and communities began to rally around its mission. Grace, though humbled by the foundation's success, remained grounded. She often visited the Harris Haven, spending time with the people it served and listening to their stories. Each visit reminded her of why she had taken on this responsibility and renewed her commitment to John's vision. One day, as she stood in the center's lobby, a young girl approached her. "Are you Miss Grace?" the girl asked shyly. Grace knelt to meet her eye level. "I am. What's your name?" "Amelia," the girl replied. "My mom says you helped us when we didn't have anywhere to go." "Thank you." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "It's not just me, Amelia. There are so many people who care about you and your family." Amelia nodded, then hugged her tightly. "But you made it happen. A lasting legacy." In the quiet moments at the estate, Grace often thought of John. She kept his photograph on her desk, a reminder of the man whose faith in her had set everything in motion. Though he was gone, his presence was felt in every life the foundation touched, every small act of kindness that rippled outward. John's story, once overshadowed by betrayal and regret, had become a testament to the power of redemption, the strength of human connection, and the enduring impact of compassion. And Grace, the caretaker who had once doubted her worth, had become the guardian of that legacy. As she looked out over the estate's rolling hills, now dotted with community gardens and gathering spaces, Grace felt a sense of peace. She knew that John's vision had been realized, not in the wealth he left behind, but in the lives it transformed. The legacy lived on. The Harris Foundation had grown into a force for change, but for Grace Walker, its true success wasn't measured in headlines or accolades. It was in the quiet victories. The caregiver who found solace in the Harris Haven after years of exhaustion. The single mother who used a foundation grant to start her own business. Or the child who smiled for the first time in weeks after receiving a backpack full of school supplies. Each story reminded Grace of the values John Harris had instilled in her. His wealth had built the foundation, but it was his vision that kept it alive. Yet, even as the foundation flourished, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that her work was just beginning. The world was filled with people like John, overlooked, undervalued, and in need of compassion. She was determined to honor his memory by continuing to expand their reach. A new mission. One morning, as Grace sat in her modest office at the Harris Foundation's headquarters, she received a call from a woman named Eleanor, the director of a struggling rural clinic. The clinic served a small, isolated community and had been on the verge of closure for months. Eleanor had heard about the foundation's work and reached out as a last resort. "Ms. Walker," Eleanor said, her voice tight with worry, "our clinic sees dozens of patients every week. Children, seniors, people who have nowhere else to go. If we shut down, I don't know what will happen to them." Grace listened carefully, her heart heavy. The foundation had already allocated much of its budget for the year, but she couldn't ignore the urgency in Eleanor's voice. "I'll visit the clinic myself," Grace promised. "Let me see what we can do." A few days later, Grace arrived at the clinic. The building was small and worn, with peeling paint and a roof that looked like it might not survive another winter. Inside, the waiting room was crowded, and the air buzzed with quiet tension. Eleanor greeted Grace with a tired smile, her relief palpable. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, guiding Grace through the clinic. "We're doing the best we can, but we're running on fumes. Our staff is overworked, and our equipment is outdated. We need help." Grace spent the day meeting the staff, talking to patients, and observing the clinic's operations. By the time she left, she was determined to find a solution. Rallying support. Back at the foundation, Grace gathered her team for an emergency meeting. "This clinic is a lifeline for its community," she said. "If it closes, people will lose access to critical care. We can't let that happen." One of her team members, a young and ambitious program manager named Carla, raised a hand. "The foundation's budget is tight, but what if we launch a fundraising campaign specifically for the clinic? We've built a strong network of supporters. If we tell their story, I think people will respond." Grace nodded. "That's a great idea. Let's put together a campaign that highlights the clinic's impact and the challenges they're facing. We'll use social media, local news outlets, and our donor network to spread the word." The campaign, titled "Save the Heart of Our Community," launched a week later. It featured stories of patients whose lives had been changed by the clinic, photographs of the dedicated staff, and a heartfelt video message from Eleanor. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from individuals, businesses, and even other nonprofit organizations. Within a month, the clinic had not only reached its fundraising goal but exceeded it. The ripple effect. The success of the campaign sparked something Grace hadn't anticipated: a movement. Inspired by the clinic's story, other rural healthcare providers began reaching out to the foundation, sharing their struggles and asking for guidance. Grace realized that the Harris Foundation could do more than just provide funding. It could become a resource for struggling communities to find sustainable solutions. To meet this new demand, Grace established the Harris Outreach Initiative, a program dedicated to identifying and supporting underserved communities. The initiative partnered with local leaders, businesses, and volunteers to address issues like healthcare, education, and housing. Grace believed that by empowering communities to help themselves, the foundation could create lasting change. Grace's growing role. As the foundation's scope expanded, so did Grace's responsibilities. She found herself juggling meetings with donors, traveling to partner organizations, and overseeing new programs. It was exhausting, but Grace thrived on the work. She felt closer to John's vision than ever before, and her efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Grace received a call from a representative of the National Nonprofit Leadership Council. They wanted to honor her with the Compassion in Action Award, a prestigious recognition given to individuals who had made significant contributions to social change. Grace was humbled but hesitant. She wasn't comfortable in the spotlight and worried that accepting the award might shift attention away from the foundation's mission. But her team encouraged her to accept, reminding her that the recognition could bring even more support to their work. The awards gala. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, filled with influential figures from the nonprofit world. Grace, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, took the stage to accept the award. As she looked out at the audience, she felt a mix of nerves and gratitude. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "This award isn't about me. It's about the countless people who have made the Harris Foundation what it is today. It's about John Harris, whose vision and generosity inspired everything we've accomplished. And it's about the communities we serve, who remind us every day that compassion has the power to change the world." The audience erupted into applause, and Grace felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for the work they had all done together. Laura's continued redemption. Laura Harris, once dismissed as a symbol of greed, had quietly transformed into one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers. Though she still faced skepticism from some, she had earned Grace's trust through consistent effort and humility. One day, Laura approached Grace with an idea. "I've been thinking about creating a program for women who've lost their way, women like me. I want to help them rebuild their lives, find purpose, and give back to their communities." Grace was intrigued. "That's a wonderful idea, Laura. Let's make it happen." The program, called Second Chances, launched 6 months later. It provided mentorship, job training, and emotional support to women seeking to turn their lives around. Laura became its face, using her own story to inspire others and prove that redemption was possible. The next generation. As the years passed, the Harris Foundation continued to grow, touching thousands of lives. Grace's children, who had once marveled at the changes in their mother's life, became deeply involved in the foundation's work. Her eldest daughter, Sophia, took on a leadership role, bringing fresh ideas and youthful energy to the organization. "Mom," Sophia said one evening, "I hope you know how proud we are of you. You've shown us what it means to live with purpose." Grace smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You're the reason I kept going when things were tough." A lasting legacy. In her later years, Grace often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought of John, whose faith in her had been the catalyst for everything. She thought of the challenges she had faced, the lives she had touched, and the countless lessons she had learned along the way. One sunny afternoon, Grace visited John's grave. She knelt beside the headstone, her hands resting on the cool stone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for giving me the chance to make a difference. I hope I've done you proud." As she rose, a gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers. Grace took it as a sign. a reminder that John's legacy wasn't just in the foundation or the people it had helped. It was in every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, and every life transformed by the power of love. Conclusion. The Harris Foundation became a beacon of hope, a testament to the idea that one person's generosity could ignite a chain reaction of change. Through her tireless efforts, Grace ensured that John's vision lived on, not as a monument to his wealth, but as a living, breathing force for good. And as the foundation continued to grow, its impact reaching farther than anyone could have imagined, Grace knew one thing for certain. The story of John Harris and the Harris Foundation was far from over. It was only the beginning.